Introductions. Hi, everyone. My name is Grace Akpali, and I am one of the Diversity Research Liaisons. Tonight, we are having our MAPS National Committee, So You Want to Be an MD PhD panel. This webinar was created to provide pre-medical students with insights into the MD PhD pathway, including the application process, training experience, and career opportunities. Our goal within the DRC is to offer guidance from current students and to professionals who have navigated this dual degree journey. I will be your moderator for this evening, and if you have any questions, please feel free to enter them into the chat. Without further ado, I would love to introduce our amazing set of panelists. Our first panelist for this evening is Kareem Woods. He is a first-year MD PhD candidate with a strong interest in cellular and molecular mechanisms underlying the effect of chronic drug use and reward-related behaviors. His research journey began as an undergraduate research fellow under Dr. Akrabali, where he contributed to multiple projects, including the investigating the link between the gut microbiome and opioid tolerance, examining the effects of sodium butyrate supplementation on opioid tolerance and neural hyperexcitability, as well as the exploration of the role of interleukin-18 in gut dysbiosis following opioid exposure. After his undergraduate studies, Kareem continued his research as a postbaccalaureate fellow in the intramural research program at the National Institute of Drug Abuse under the mentorship of Dr. Bruce Hope. His work at NIH or at NIDA focused on understanding how behaviorally activated neurons encode cue drug associations at the molecular level. Now, as a medical student, Kareem remains committed to advancing research in addiction science while also working to foster a more inclusive and diverse scientific environment for both future researchers and clinicians. Thank you so much for joining us, Kareem. That is a really impressive bio just to hear about your journey from undergrad, your research in undergrad, as well as your research at NIH, and now being a medical student. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. Our second panelist I want to introduce you guys to is Nina Uzokwe. She is a fourth-year MD PhD candidate within the former NIH Medical Sciences Training Program at NYU Grossman School of Medicine. As a child of Nigerian immigrant parents, she was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York, and went to Stuyvesant High School, where she was awarded the NYC Council Proclamation of Exemplary Academic Achievements and received the Young Peg Leg Award, which is the highest distinction recognized by the governor of New York State from the executive chamber, the mayor of NYC, and the Manhattan Borough president, awarded to rising alumnus. After capturing national attention for being accepted to 7 Ivy League schools, she graduated from Harvard College as a John Harvard Scholar, which is a distinction awarded to the top 5% of her class. She concentrated in bioengineering with a secondary in global health and health policy. Her senior thesis, which won the Thomas T. Hopes Prize, an award recognized for outstanding scholarly work or research by students selected by the Committee of Faculty from Harvard University Faculty of Arts and Sciences, examined pulmonary valve replacement in neonates with congenital heart defects at Boston Children's Hospital. Since starting medical school, Nina has become the co-founder and executive director of Rise Up, a underrepresented in medicine outreach physician sciences program for high school students. She's also the executive secretary for the Thoracic Surgery Medical Students Association, TSMA, and the National Diversity Research Committee co-chair, as well as being a board of directors member for the Student National Medical Association. Now in her PhD phase of her training, she is studying cardioimmunology and is extremely passionate about cardiac medicine and global health equity. Thank you so much for joining us, Nina. I know you wear many hats within the SNMA organization, and again, very similar to Kareem, very impressive background as well. Our third and final panelist is Oye Bosampra. She's a fifth-year MSTP student at the University of California, San Diego. She's currently in her third year of her PhD Biomedical Sciences training program. Oye is a native California, and she graduated from UCLA in 2018 with a bachelor's in molecular, cell, and developmental biology, as well as a minor in biomedical research. While at UCLA, Oye was supported by multiple research programs, namely the Howard Hughes Medical Institute Pathways and MARC programs for underrepresented minorities. Through such programs, she was able to gain support to complete 2 years of cell biology research, as well as 2 different summer research programs. Following her time at UCLA, Oye spent 2 years at the National Institute of Aging in Baltimore to pursue research in dietary interventions for health and lifespan, while also taking time to study for her MCAT and apply to med school. She is now in the Trejo lab at UCSD studying the role of tumor suppressor proteins and immune signaling in triple-negative breast cancer, a very aggressive breast cancer subtype that predominantly affects premenopausal and African American patients. Thank you so much, Oye, as well, for joining us for this session. I know you were coming out of lab, so we really appreciate your dedication and commitment towards volunteering time to speak to our pre-meds within the SNMA organization. Without further ado, I would love to get started with the first question that we have prepared for the panelists tonight. And that question is, what inspired you to pursue an MD PhD instead of a MD or just PhD program? Why do the dual degree path?
I can start us off. So good evening, everyone. So excited to see you all here and so excited to be here to talk about the MD PhD pathway as a whole. So just to give you some background context, my mom, she's a pediatrician. My dad's a pharmacist. So I kind of grew up in the medical field from a very young age. Even when my mom was going through residency, I was literally like at the back of the car at 4 a.m. in the morning, driving her to her like location and just being able to be there with her when I was in kindergarten and pre-K. So from the very young age, I kind of had an idea of what she was going through and also the sacrifices that she made, especially the longitudinal relationship she was making with patients. But over time, I realized that wasn't enough for me. I kind of wanted to get to the root cause as to why people are going through issues. Like, why does this person have diabetes? Why does this person have cancer? Why does this person have all these different types of ailments? I didn't really understand my reasoning as to why I was asking so many questions until I did a clinical fellowship in Milan, Italy, where I got to basically shadow different departments and different places in Ospedale Necarta, which is one of the largest hospitals in Milan, basically. And I was placed in the oncology department where I got to basically shadow residents and doctors who are looking at patients who are very terminally ill. And so as I was on that ward, being able to see patients that were so sick, patients where family members were basically crying about whether or not they wanted to terminate their life and things of that nature, I kind of felt helpless where I couldn't really do anything to help them except to sort of treat their symptoms and give palliative care. But it wasn't until a resident basically gave me a paper that basically talked about nanomedicine and how we can actually attack these molecules, these cancer cells from molecular level, that I realized that research was a way for me to be more hands-on when being able to help my patients and really improve their quality care of life. And so from that point onward, I knew that I wanted to sort of combine my research background with an MD and sort of see like how I can do that within the field of medicine that I'm interested in. So that's how I got interested in the MD PhD pathway and why I can't really see myself doing an MD without having some sort of research component.
Really great answer, Nina.
Am I unmuted? I can't tell.
Yes,
Yeah,
we can hear
okay.
you.
So I thought that was really interesting, Nina. I feel like I had like a very similar but also like different experience where so I'm also the daughter of an immigrant and my mother's also a pediatrician. So I had that medical influence from early on as well. But I think for me, what's really interesting is I didn't even know that MD PhD was a career growing up. And in high school, I grew up in Central California, which is a lot of agriculture is there. If anyone's familiar with the Central Valley, and there's not much like higher education that goes on. And so when I went to UCLA, I didn't really know what a career in research and biology even meant. I didn't really know of it as an option. So I was like gearing forward just doing medicine. And as was mentioned before in the intro, I did a couple of research programs that kind of like help encourage students to go into biomedical research from early on in college. And so I think for me, what I realized is that unlike the undergraduate like chemistry and bio and physics classes that are always like known as like leader classes, and like your conversations with your friends are like what'd you get on that exam, like what class are you taking next quarter, like very regular college conversations, but also somewhat competitive. And like I don't want to admit that I hated physics to like every other person in these conversations, but I found research was more of a space where it's like everyone is good at what they are doing, or everyone is very passionate about whatever they're studying, and they're very humble and able to recognize that they don't know what the person next to them is studying, and they want to know what the person next to them is studying. And I found it was a much less competitive environment. I found that I made friends easier in my laboratory that I ended up joining, and in like social organizations. It wasn't so much of a like discussion on classes and like applications. It wasn't that competitive environment, but it was very like personable and relaxed. And it's like, I don't really know like how to write a grant, but I have to for my class. And it's like, me too. I don't even know what I'm doing in my research, but it was very much relatable. And so I found that I related to that type of environment a lot, where everyone is just excited to learn something that they're passionate about, even though they might not know what they're passionate about. And so as I joined these like research programs, that's what first like let me know that an MD PhD program even existed. And I realized that even though I was passionate about medicine from the jump, I was like very intrigued that I could then combine research to then, like improve my medical, I guess what my medical training could offer. So that's kind of like an overview of how I got into this.
Yeah, I think I had a similar experience. I technically never was a pre-med. I hated being around pre-med students. So mostly did research. And honestly, I came to MD PhD mostly out of like being indecisive. And it was something that my mentor suggested to me my senior year before I graduated. Like you should go to NIDA and do MD PhD because you're gonna get bored doing just MD. Um, but I think the MD part came mostly because if you look at especially basic science, some of the questions we ask are not like clinically relevant. They're more so like passion projects, and that really bothered me. So I felt like the MD would help me guide my research in the future, and that's why I'm pursuing it now.
Thank you guys so much for that response. And I know in the waiting room before this session, we kind of discussed a little bit, but one of the other questions that we had prepared is, can you guys tell us a little bit more about the difference between MD, PhD and MSTP programs? I know in some places they're kind of used interchangeably to describe this pathway. And can you also tell us the year or what program you're currently attending? And where you are in your training.
Yeah. So, I can begin. I'll just begin. And remind me if I like skip anything. So, I'm a fifth year in the training at UCSD, as was mentioned before. So that means I've finished 2 years of medical school already, and I'm now in my third year of my PhD. And so at UCSD, this program is an MSTP. And so you mentioned like, how do we distinguish what's what? And so generally what I know is like MSTPs, it just stands for Medical Scientist Training Program. And those are the MD PhD programs in the country that are funded by the NIH and the government. So there are MD PhD programs that are not fully funded by the NIH, but maybe the school gets donors or out. I don't really know the specifics, but some schools require, like I think of Georgetown as a school I was applying to, where it was like you had to pay for like half of the medical school, or it was like they would only support the PhD. Like some schools are MD PhDs just because more of the financial requirement, versus if you are in an MSTP program, then either the NIH or like your PIs, or there are different sources of funding where you are federally funded for the most part. Um, but there was one other thing that you had asked, right? Was that it?
That was it. You answered
Okay.
most of the questions. Yeah.
Yeah, just to reiterate, I think it's important to note that the MD-PhD is basically an umbrella term, and the MSTP is like a subgroup underneath that. And so people who are typically in MSTP programs are basically funded by T32, by the NIH, and their institutions are basically able to support their students through that grant funding. As for me specifically, I'm currently a fourth-year MD-PhD student at NYU, and NYU does things a little bit differently in comparison to standard timelines, where you have like 2 years of med school, 4 years of PhD, and then 2 years of your last few years of med school. At NYU, we basically do all 3 years of your MD. So I've done my clinical rotations, taken my board exams, and now I'm entering my first year of my PhD phase, where I'm basically getting ready to pre-qual and things of that nature. And then once I complete my PhD, I'll go back into my final year and apply for residency and go to all that stuff basically and match and everything. So that's my timeline.
Yeah, I'm a first year at Oregon Health and Science, and that's MSTP. So we're funded by T32s for now. So I'm a first year, and I have like a standard program. So it's 2 years of preclinical, 4 years of PhD, and then the last 2 years, and then you can apply for residency.
Perfect. Thank you guys so much for answering that question. And one of the last few questions that we had for the kind of just the why MD PhD set of pre-prepared questions. But was there any experiences or mentors or defining moments that kind of just solidified your decision to apply for MD PhD programs? Was there a specific time? Like, did you decide on this pathway as a sophomore in undergrad? While you were, I know 2 of you were ERDAs as well. Did you decide that during that post-bac program or before you did a research intensive post-bac, if that was your path?
I didn't hear about the MD PhD program until my junior year. So my PI, I was in the lab that I was working in, actually told me about it. And that's when everything clicked in terms of like, at that time, I had like 6 years of research for both in high school and also in college. And being able to sort of see like how all the questions I've been asking, why this, why that, why does this disease present this way, it came together. And like being able to have her support and mentorship was very fundamental in my application process and figuring out how to structure my narrative so I'm able to apply timely. I didn't have any gap years. I basically applied straight through, but that's how I found the MD PhD program through the mentors that I was surrounded by, basically. Yeah.
I would say for me, I can't say there was like one specific experience that solidified my decision, but I will say I did do a number of different experiences over like my academic journey. So I did 2 years of research in undergrad. It was mentioned that I did they call them SURFs, which are summer undergraduate research fellowships. I did a SURF where I feel like that was maybe like my first like switch into taking MD PhD seriously, because whereas my undergraduate research was very basic science, like everyone here would fall asleep if I told you about it. It was like fibroblast cell migration, like how do cells move and what are the proteins that are involved in the movement. And then I went to the SURF program and the research was very clinically relevant. The PI was actually starting up some sort of like side like biotech company, and the field was in oncolytic biotherapy, which was something I had like no experience in, knew nothing about. I didn't even think I belonged there because I hadn't even taken a virology class before. And then I go and it's like this field where they're engineering viruses, like the DNA of viruses, so that they can be used as a cancer treatment, which is like crazy. Like they were working on the measles virus, and I'm like, how are you going to put measles into people and make that a cure for cancer? So I think it was like experiences like that, and also my NIH experience after I graduated, where it was also very like translational research. There I was studying the effects of diet and nutrition on aging in your lifespan and like the biological mechanisms that are involved in that. And so I think I would say it wasn't one experience, but like seeing the experiences of what translational research looks like and how things such as like diet and like tools that we already have can be used to improve our health span and lifespan really solidified that I was interested in the merge. I didn't feel like a PhD on its own was what I wanted, because I did like the social components of medicine, and the idea of like being a leader in your community and being able to treat others who like might not feel so trusting of like the medical system. But I also didn't feel like I wanted to leave behind the research, because I truly have felt most at home in my research spaces where I can just like talk to people and like be willing to learn about what the next person is doing, and be like humble about it.
Thank you so much for that information. I know it's hard to determine if it's a light bulb moment or just like a culmination. To follow up, Oye, when did you decide to apply to MD PhD programs? Was that in your post-bac years then?
Yeah, that's a good question. So my decision was like solely on the basis of my MCAT score, which I'm sure a lot of people get into this like whole situation. And so I took the MCAT twice, and I took it the first time my third year of college, and I got a score that I wasn't too happy with. And so I decided I would for sure apply to medical school, and maybe apply to like half medical only and half MD PhD programs. And when I didn't get the score that I wanted my third year of undergrad, I was like, okay, well, I would consider taking some time off to do research and like give myself time to retake the MCAT. And I was like, well, if I'm getting another research experience, like I do think that would make me a stronger MD PhD applicant. And I also do think it would probably be a red flag to give so much time to research. And I was in these like research organizations and research programs, but I'm not going to take an extra 2 years off and then apply MD only. And so I kind of saw it as like a opportunity in itself, where it was like, well, if I take 2 years off, then maybe I should do more MD PhD programs than MD only programs. And then I found that extra experience also like pushed me towards MD PhDs as well. So I will say it was the MCAT that first like made that decision for me.
Thank you so much for sharing. And then Kareem, I don't know if you want to go and just share a little bit of when you decided in your timeline to pursue the MD PhD pathway.
So I decided my senior year, and up until that, I was pretty sure I was going to just do a PhD. Um, I didn't even know like what MD PhD was at that time, and then up until that point, I did a lot of like community service. So I really enjoyed interacting with people. I really thought a lot about like health inequities, and that really influenced me to add on the MD. As far as like deciding the timeline when to apply, I knew from my senior year I was a okay candidate to apply for MD PhD programs, but I wanted more like addiction related um, research experience beforehand, so I decided to go to NIDA. And then that gave me a lot of time to like study for the MCAT, because it's really hard to do that in undergrad when you have all these other classes. But in a post-bac program, you just have so much free time other than doing research.
Perfect. And that kind of flows into kind of the next set of questions that we have before starting to take any audience questions. But if any of our audience members, if you have any burning questions that popped up, please enter them in the chat and we'll try to address them. But going back to the application process, so once you decided to pursue this pathway, were there any like differences that you would say are important to note between the MD only pathway and the MD PhD pathway with curating application materials? Were there any like changes to your personal statement that you made that you think is really important as an MD PhD applicant or pre-meds who are considering applying to those programs? I know it's been a while, so I'm going to put Kareem on the spot since you just recently went through this process.
Yeah. I would say it's very different. I wouldn't even compare yourself to like your friends or peers that are applying MD only. You're gonna have a very research heavy application. You may not have like 1,000 hours of shadowing or like clinical volunteering, because the majority of your time should be in research. As far as like your applications and like your essays, you have to highlight like why research is important and why it's going to facilitate innovation and like the medical, or like in a clinical setting, how that's going to translate to patients. That's what they really care about. And things that will make you like stand out, experiences that are not related to medicine or science, they really like that. So like community service, like hobbies, like they really love that stuff.
Yeah, I think for me, whenever I think about an application, no matter what stage of life I'm in, whether I'm applying to college or to medical school or for even for residency, I kind of think about each component of an application as a chapter in the book of my life. And so I think it's really important to not reiterate the same story or narrative in each section. You kind of want to have the same streamline, like same topic or same like passions being iterated, but you don't want the same like stories word to word, if that makes any sense. So usually you'd have like your primary like why MD essay, then you'd have your why research essay, which is a bit longer, which basically allows you to talk about your research experiences and also like how those experiments like helped you grow your autonomy and your ability to be a researcher. And then of course you have your other things, which is just being able to write about your extracurriculars, whether or not you played sports. I played rugby in college, so I talked about that. Your other research experiences that weren't as significant as it needed to be for the full essay that you had to write. And I think the important thing when being able to write about any of these things is being able to talk about how this impacted you as a person. A lot of the times people list out different like accolades that they have, different achievements, different awards, but they don't really talk about like how this experience helped form the person that they are, the way that they think about the world, the way they interact with people, the way they interact with their communities and their organizations. The impact that they're basically having within those communities too is so important because at the end of the day, you are an investment for this school, and being able to show like how much you're worth is very important. So that's the biggest thing that I would say. Like not only like having the research experience or having the clinical exposure, but also being able to talk about it and how you've grown from it and how you basically are building that growth mindset as you become a doctor, as you become a physician scientist and later in life and later in your career. You want to be able to see that you're able to grow and that you're a person that is a learner, not just an absorber or a person who's just getting like things on their CV or resume.
I actually think worded that really well. Like I she stole a lot of what I wanted to say. I do think it's I mean you are writing these applications trying to, I always thought of it as like you're trying to sell yourself in a way where you are trying to convince someone that you really want to be somewhere. You want to be locked in the same city, not always because of research might change in cities, but you want to be locked in the same city doing the same degree for the next 8 years. And you're like, I'm the one that you want for your program. And you're really trying to like sell yourself in terms of like, this is why I want this. So that's why I kind of think it's hard. It's hard to just like walk into an MD PhD program and just like, like write an AMCAS and be like, oh, I'm just going to shoot my shot. Because it does take like, you need to show that you like have shown interest in research. You do need to show that like you're interested in medicine, and why not one or why not the other. Um, in terms of though, like anything, I actually enjoyed like writing some of the essays. I will say like there is that extra like why MD PhD essay. And I think the biggest thing is like exactly what was said before. It's not just like listing out like success stories or like any achievements that you've gotten, but it's really like showing your growth throughout this journey, because I know a lot happens in 8 years. And I do think like to be a good MD PhD student, you have to be open to change and be very malleable. You never know how experiments are going to go. You have to show in your essays that you're open to failure, that you're open, that you know how to pivot. And that doesn't mean like bullet points on like, here are all the times I failed, here are all the times I've been successful, but it's more so like just telling a story about your life. So I found that my favorite essay to write was the significant research experience, because I really felt like that was the story. It was like, I've never touched research, and then in this year I joined this lab, and this is when I learned what a Western blot was. And I was like, I didn't even know what a Western blot was. And then I used it in my like my virology lab in the summer. And I didn't know that the Western blots I did in my first lab would transfer to the second lab. And it's very much like a story where it's not just like listing achievements, but it's also like being vulnerable and being like, I learned this and I achieved this and I wrote this for the first time and I got to travel here and I presented at this conference. And it's really your time to like showcase yourself through your storytelling. um, and I think some people might feel that way about why medicine, and some people might feel a bit more about that way with the why, like the research experience essay. But um, yeah, I guess it's a lot of space to just show how you've grown over the years.
Perfect. Thank you guys for offering those tips. We have one more application kind of process and personal statement questions, and then we'll again open it to audience questions. But as far as your application process, how many programs did you apply to? And did MSTP funding play a role in the construction of your school list, or were there any other factors that contributed to the programs that you selected to apply to when you were pre-meds? And Kareem, we're
Ooh,
going to put you on the spot again. As the most recent.
I think I applied to like 25 programs, and they're all MSTP, besides Georgetown. Factors that I took into consideration when applying was like location, because you're gonna be there for like 7 to 8 years. The structure of the program, whether it's like 3 years preclinical and then your PhD, or like a standard program. Um, I also have a twin brother that's in the MSTP program, so I was like trying to figure out if we could go to the same program. But that's something I thought about a lot.
So family support was also important for you. Are you guys at the same program now, or y'all
No,
ended up with two different programs?
yeah. So he's at Emory, and I'm out here in Oregon. I don't even have family in Oregon, so I don't. I'm out here by myself.
When opportunity knocks, you gotta answer.
Yeah, I applied to somewhere between 10 to 20 schools. I think the biggest things for me was one, there were three pillars. The first one was being able to find being an institution that would basically help support my academic careers, because at the end of the day, like this is just one pit stop in the journey and the rest of the life you're going to live. And you want to make sure that you're putting the best footing to take a step forward when you get to residency and so forth and so on. So I really wanted to go to a place that had a very strong like cardiothoracic surgery or cardiology department, and NYU gave that. Another thing was also being able to have a strong support system. Again, being a Black woman within the MD PhD program is such a rare thing to come across. And when you find another person who shares your background, your story is so important for me, and being able to think through surviving through 7 to 8 years. And so being in a place like New York City, I could find that easily, being able to be surrounded by people, not only within the med school, but also in the law school or the business school. I can really just like hop around and like find my community within those spaces. And there were people within the program that were very welcoming and open arms and being able to help me navigate the 7 to 8 years, both in the MD and the PhD side. And then the other thing was also family. My family has been living here for the past like 30 years. And so being able to go home 40 minutes away by train to sort of see my mom and my dad and have home cooked meals was really great, especially during those long hours on clerkships where you're basically working 80 hours a week on surgery. So it's just really helped me in terms of being able to sort of navigate my time, not only where I'm able to grow like academically and professionally, but also personally in my relationships and my friendships and family as well. So those were all things I found to be very important for my decision-making skills and picking a school ultimately.
Yeah, very I share a very similar experience. And so I think they do recommend applying about like 20 schools more or less when you're doing MD PhD programs. So I shot for 17. I ended up only submitting secondaries to 10, I believe, just because of some personal circumstances. But I found that was enough for me, and I was able to get a couple interviews. And so I also found that I guess actually what was most important to me was doing research that was of my interest. At the time I was applying, I was really interested in the field of aging, and not every institution really has like centers of research for aging or metabolism. And so I was kind of leading my interviews on institutions where I saw myself happy doing the research there. And again, I think that's like if medicine's more important to you, you might find like an institution that, like kind of Nina said, like has like, you know, strong residency program in your medical field of interest, or like serves a community that you might want. For me, my interest is more on the research. So then I was already looking at labs, not to reach out to them, but just like to have names in mind of PIs that I would like love that to have the opportunity to work with if I got into that institution. And I was kind of leading with that, but I also think in hindsight, a big decision in where I wanted to go was having a community. And because I'm raised in California, I was actually very happy to come back over here after Baltimore. I moved to UCSD, and you know, I went from being across the country from everyone I know to being 2 hours away from my college friends and 4 hours away from family. And I do think that's been like a game changer in terms of just having support through this program. Um, yeah, I would say like having community does very much matter. It doesn't mean you can't make new community though in that program. So I don't think I would. I guess it depends on you, but I didn't find that that was like my number one foot to lead on. But um, I do think community matters in hindsight.
Wonderful. Thank you guys so much for sharing. So around 20-ish applicants per program, and then funding, family. Support systems seem to be kind of the big deciding factors, it seems, to some of the school list. As I mentioned earlier, we are taking audience questions, so please feel free to enter that into the chat. But if there are no questions, we're going to continue with some of the pre-prepared questions. So to follow up with that, so after applying to the schools, how many programs did you interview with, and what did you do to specifically prepare for MD, PhD interviews?
I think I had like 8 interviews, and the most of the preparation is just to be able to comfortably talk about your research, and also like things you do that kind of enforce like your motivation to continue with like such a long journey. And that usually like involves you're gonna like sit down and do like a bunch of mock interviews, which I highly recommend. Um, there's also like NMIs, which are like little stations. This year they were like virtual, so like you would go to like different Zoom rooms and they would like ask you a series of questions. Definitely prepare for that because that can be very nerve-wracking. Um, I don't know, you just have to. It's basically like you have to be really comfortable with selling yourself and yeah, be like overconfident.
Definitely. I would even like add that you would have to really know your application. I think a lot of people come in like asking questions, or the interviewers tend to ask questions about what you actually wrote on the paper, about specific research experiences, like what was the background behind this, methods behind this, like what did you do to actually investigate this question? And it's really important that you're able to sort of sit down for 30 to 40 minutes, but with another investigator or a PI, and basically talk about your paper and your research and why you did the things you did and why you chose to do the experiments that you did. Because at the end of the day, they just want to be able to see that you're able to really think critically and logic through experimental planning and how you're going to be able to be a researcher and things of that nature. So I think a huge thing is to know your application, know your CV, know your experiences, be able to talk about them off the bat, like have some like 5 to 6 stories, whether it be in different leadership skills or research capacities, or like your experiences with family members and friends that really show who you are as a person and your character. That really helps you as well. I also remember looking through YouTube and looking at YouTube videos for MMIs, having like different examples, like for logic reasoning and different scenarios that I could practice with friends, and that really helped me, like being able to do mock interviews. I applied during COVID 2020, so I practiced being able to do these mock interviews through like Zoom basically with friends and mentors and people who are reading through my application. That also helped me build my confidence. At the end of the day, it's really important to know that you're in control of your narrative and like how you present yourself. And so the more confident you are with being able to do that, the better you'll do on the interview day itself. I will add that for MD PhD schools, especially for some of them, you might have to like interview for the MD and the PhD separately. So you'd have like a full day of MD interviews, and then next day you'll have a full day of PhD interviews, and that could like vary between like having like 5 to 18 interviews based on what schools you're applying to. So it's something that's also important to keep in mind. And I would definitely recommend like talking to students who are currently there, sort of see what their experience is like and what people are looking for that stellar applicant. But those are all things that you could find on your interview trail and sort of figure out how to best put your best foot forward with being able to sort of address all of these different things that you have to do to apply.
Great. Thank you guys so much for those responses. And look at it, we have so many audience questions. So one of the first questions that we have from Allison Throm, did any of the presenters apply to both MD and MD PhD programs? And if so, what influenced your decision to apply to both? Also, can you clarify, I don't know if they give you the option at some programs to apply to the MD PhD and then be considered for the MD program? If you guys can answer that clarifying question.
I think when you apply, you're automatically like considered for the MD. So like at Maryland, if you don't get into like the MD PhD program, they'll like most likely admit you into the MD. Um, I applied all MSTP programs, so I didn't really have that experience with just MD only.
Yeah, be very mindful and check the websites for all the schools that you might be applying to, because some schools might have you like default into the MD core category if you don't make the MD PhD, while others just only consider you for the MD PhD, because there were some schools I applied to who did that. I think that for me, I only applied to MD PhD. I realized that for me, applying both MD and MD PhD was kind of tricky, especially when you're thinking about recommendation letters. My school basically sent a whole packet of all the recommendation letters together. And so it just became a lot of moving parts if I were to separate both. And I saw myself doing research regardless. So it didn't really make much sense to me to apply to both. But that is my experience with the application process.
I don't know if I remember too much, but I do remember that, like, I remember there were some schools that, like, after I'd interviewed, they'd asked, oh, if you do not get into our MD PhD, like, what would you like to happen? Which is like, would you like to be reconsidered for MD only or PhD only, or withdraw your application? So I don't know how common that is, but I do remember that happened a few times.
Thank you guys so much. Nina brought up a really good point, which was another question that came up. For letters of recommendations, how did you guys determine your letter writers? I know some programs have committee letters, and then other schools you just send individually, maybe 3 to 4. Can you give a little bit of insight to your selection for letters of recommendations?
It depends on the school. So some schools um, they want like a letter of recommendation from like a basic science professor, research, community service, stuff like that. So it really just depends on the university. And in AMCAS, you can choose what letter of recommendation goes to which university. So you just have to check the prereqs before that.
Are they still using Interfolio? Kareem, do you remember? Or do you know?
I don't think so.
Okay. I don't know if it's still out there, but I put a huge plug for Interfolio. I thought it made the letter writing process so easy. It's like your letter writers submit. I don't know if there's like a different program out now that people are using, but you like submit your letter writers submit all their letters to this program, and this program submits the letters to schools for you. So I think it like made the letter writing process so easy, from what I remember. And then I do remember I did something risky in terms of like letter writers where for MD PhDs, I did think that they would want more research letters than medical letters. And I knew that like I know every applicant's gonna have their strengths and weaknesses. So I knew my weakness was in clinical. I didn't have like a solid medical letter at all. And so what I leaned on for the medical letter is that one of my PIs was an MD PhD himself. But other than that, I had like, yeah, basic science letter. I had it from a faculty that I took a class from my senior year of college. And then I had 3 different PIs that wrote me a letter of recommendation. And then I think I had a professor from a science organization that I volunteered in and I was on the leadership board for. And then I also had a letter from a research program that funded me. So those are a lot of like, my letters were more so like leadership slash like extracurricular. And then bulk of them were research. And the medicine one was a stretch, but I do think they would probably want at least one medical like letter. But that's an example of how I did that.
Perfect. And then, in the interest of time, I'm going to try to group some of the audience questions. But can you give any insights to whether or not you already had your research area and topic selected when you were applying to programs as a pre-med, or is that something that you decided on in medical school? And if so, how much research did you have in that topic before applying? And did you find that that was important to have before applying?
Briefly, I can say no. It was like my the topic that so I was really interested in the topic that I was doing, the research I was doing at the time I applied, which was when I was in my postbac at the NIH. So I did apply to programs with that foot forward. I was like, I'm interested in your labs that are doing metabolic or aging studies. As soon as I began medical school, it's like, at least in my experience, none of that really mattered. It's like, of course, like the MSCP program was helping me identify PIs in the topics that I said I was interested in. But I feel like I could have said anything, like I want to do breast cancer research, I want to do like virology research, whatever. As soon as I stepped foot in the medical school, and they would have supported me in my pivot to literally whatever I was interested in. So that being said, I'm doing breast cancer research, and I'm not doing a single thing about aging metabolism. And there's been no resistance to that. So I think you don't have to know what you want to be doing in your PhD, but I do think in your application you should sound focused. You should say, like, I have this interest, it's based on my previous experiences, it's based in my clinical experiences. And you can let yourself pivot as you go through your medical school curriculum, and your rotations. But I do think you should sound focused in the application for application's sake.
Yeah, I definitely agree that it's good to sound focused during the application, especially since like when I was applying, you basically got to choose who was your interviewer based on which like interest level you have. Like the people I chose were interested in cardiology research and stem cell research. At the time, I was very interested in that stuff, and so it really helped with being able to talk during the interview because I understood they had like the background of the research that I was doing initially, and so it just became a lot easier for being able to talk about different transcription factors, experimental models, and just became like a very like flowing conversation because we're both speaking the same language. So I think it's important to be focused, but you don't have to be tied to that same topic as you go through your MD, PhD. Again, like I had the opportunity and the privilege to sort of have my clinical rotations before I stepped into my PhD phase. And throughout that time, I really got to test the waters about whether or not I was interested in cardiovascular research, being able to do basic science within that field. And I'm pretty sure that my program would have supported me if I were to pivot based on the experiences that I had. At the end of the day, they want to make sure that you are comfortable whenever research topic you choose, and that you're doing things that are important to you and it's in the core of your passion. So I think there is flexibility as you go throughout your program, but in terms of the application itself, I highly recommend that you're focused, as OU was saying.
Perfect. Thank you guys so much for answering that question. Um, we finally had a lifestyle question come in, but what would you describe as your normal week, as a PhD, if you're in your PhD year or your medical, pathway? So, what does your current week look like? And luckily, all of our panelists are kind of spread out through the program. So, Kareem, I don't know if you want to start off as our medical student, since you're in the first year.
Um, it's it's not chill. It's pretty chaotic sometimes. Lots of lecture, lots of like anatomy lab, shadowing, preceptorship. So it can be pretty busy. Yeah, and then like nine time like right now this block is pretty accelerated, so it's only like 5 weeks. So I have been having to do like a lot more work on the weekend, but like normally for longer blocks we don't really do stuff. But yeah, it's like what everybody describes med school as, like being really chaotic and drinking through a fire hose. So it's a lot.
Yeah, my lifestyle in comparison to how things were during clerkship, where I was working many hours a week, is a lot better now. I'm basically just taking like graduate school classes, introductory classes for the field of research I'm interested in, which is like cardioimmunology. I'm also just running experiments for getting preliminary data for my research and my proposal and my pre-qualification exam. So my day-to-day basically looks like me taking classes in the evening and doing my experiments in the morning and the afternoon, and then having meetings with people in my thesis committee or my PI to sort of discuss like future directions for my projects. I also have the opportunity to sort of be a teaching assistant. So I also help oversee a class with another professor. So I basically have a lot more flexibility with how I go through my day-to-day work in terms of how I structure my time in the lab and outside the lab and all of my writing and things of that nature. But I definitely would say I have a lot more flexibility than I had during my rotations and also things in medical school in general, to be honest.
Um, and then I would say for me, my day to days, yeah, like it was mentioned, grad school is very nice compared to medical school. Like I'm in a pretty laid back lab, so and I'm doing cell work. I'm not doing animal work anymore. So I mean, I show up to lab like at 10, to be honest, because my PI is pretty laid back. I have a lot of like like she's not a hovering PI, so I start my experiments when I want, I end them when I want. I usually do like a 10 to 6. I'll run like, I don't know, 2 to 3 experiments a week just because our protocols are a little longer. But sometimes I'll come in on the weekends to do like a little drug treatment because we do a lot of those. But that's like a 30-minute treatment. Otherwise, I have my weekends to myself. I go to the gym like almost every night on the weeknights. Otherwise, I'm like watching a movie. Like it's very much more laid back compared to like medical school where I was, it's classes and stuff all day, every day in the daytime, and then it's like well, a coffee shop you want to go study at night. Like that was the routine, like 7 days a week. So
Thank you guys so much. We have a few more audience questions to get through before ending the session for tonight, but just so many gems I think that we've received from you guys in like the last 40 minutes. Like I'm like, wow, we covered so much ground. But we have 2 audience questions, one from Jasmine Richards and another one from Destiny Taylor. As far as, applications and being on interviews, if you guys are on interview panels for your schools, what would you say are some of the red flags that you've seen or that you think could be a red flag for someone interested in the MD PhD pathway? And then the other application question is, do you have any advice for students who might be applying with lower stats?
I think the major red flag that I've seen is people not really knowing their application. I think it's really important, again, to review everything that you submit, your essay, your significant research essay, your YMD essay, your secondary, your supplements, basically, and all of your experiences that you talk about. Because they literally sometimes would have the application run in front of them. They would point to a line and be like, hey, tell me about this experience. How did this transform your passion to become a doctor or a researcher? Like, okay, so why did you guys frame this like experimental model this way in terms of different research things that you might be doing? So I think it's really important to know not only what you did, but also how you did it and why you did it and what it means to you. In terms of applying with applications that might not have like stats that you are not happy with, I think it's really important to be in conversation with your pre-med advisor and basically talk to them about what the plan might look like for you, because everyone is a case-by-case basis. Everyone has different backgrounds, different stories that they're walking from. And I think it's really important to put that into context when they're applying for MD PhD programs and also in the context of the stats of the school itself. So I think it's important to figure out, okay, where are the weak points? Where are the strong points? How can we adjust for this in the next 6 months, a year or 2, maybe able to take 2 gap years, and sort of exploring what opportunities are available to you as a student, whether it's becoming an emergency medical technician. I was also an EMT during my college days, and also like whether it's also going to some sort of clinical fellowship or doing a post-bac program. I think it's important to get counseling from people around you and those who are your mentors to sort of figure out how to best strategize a path that's best suited for you and what you want to achieve, instead of just following anything that you might find without taking into context who you are as a person.
briefly, I will say that, like I said, every application will have its weaknesses. Like you can only do so much within your 4 years of college and even your post grad unless you take the time for it. So the one thing I will add is that I wouldn't say like don't apply until you feel like you have your best application at hand. But I also do want to say that it's not over till it's over. And what I mean by that is, again, I was like more of a clinically weak applicant instead of a research. I was more of a research heavy applicant, and I knew I was like stats heavy, but I was very weak clinically. Like everyone has their weakness, and so I hadn't shadowed anyone even until the moment I had submitted my AMCAS, and I knew that would go against me. And so I made sure that I would get my shadowing in so that I could add it onto my applications during my secondaries and submit my secondaries. And I found that kind of also was mentioned before is that every single interview asked me about shadowing because, again, it is important to have some sort of a clinical experience on your application. So every single person in my interview was like, oh, we see you shadowed 2 months ago. Can you tell me about that experience? So all to say, like, it was never like, dang, I shouldn't apply because I need a year of shadowing. Like, don't limit yourself, but also like know your weaknesses and like do not like if you have like, oh, I have a perfect GPA, but I failed chem like 5 times, like be ready to talk about what you did to remedy why you failed chemistry 5 times. Like maybe you took it 6 times, got 110% in the class. Like be prepared to defend like any of your weaknesses. And if you felt like you could defend it to your mother, you could probably defend it to the committee or whoever's interviewing you.
Thank you guys so much for those responses. We have a really popular question I think is really great to ask before we get ready to close out the session for tonight. But Jasmine Richards was asking, when thinking about your long-term goals, lifestyle, relationships, and potential family planning, how did you navigate or plan for the journey both mentally and physically? Fiscally, sorry. Talking about money.
I think I was like fiscally, I remember I mean, again, it's been a while for me, but I remember I was like working at the NIH. So I do think I like depleted a lot of my savings from working that job. And I do know like they say like some schools offer fee waivers, and I forgot there's the thing that you can apply for where if you got the fee waiver for the MCAT, then you can get it for this too. I do think like finances did limit how many schools I applied to in the end. And so I did have like an Excel sheet where I documented like all the things I could find about pricing. So I knew how much money I would have to save up for.
I think for me personally, I'm a very goal-oriented person. So like I tend to sort of come into things with a vision or a plan. So for me, I knew that I wanted to sort of go into cardiothoracic surgery. And for that, I kind of wanted to take a lull, like with a PhD and relax, take the time to sort of take a chill pill before I go into residency for 6 to 7 years. So I think when thinking about like long-term goals and lifestyles and relationships, I really prioritize being at home around family for community. So I'm able to be around my family members, my mom, my dad, my sisters, and my brothers. I think being able to sort of be around by people who care about me, people who've known me since the day I was born, was really important for making sure that I'm supported mentally and physically as well. So I think like being mindful of what's important to you and what's your part of your moral compass is really important for making decisions like this, because you are committing to a location for the next 7 to 8 years of your life. And I think it's really important to understand what the trade-offs are when you're thinking about different schools that you want to apply to, and also like find peace whenever you do make that decision for where you want to go. I think that's very important because you don't want to have any regrets or any like shortcomings or wait, what if I ask this question? Any like things that make you doubt yourself or why the purpose and the reason why you're there in the first place. So I think like being very intentional about who you are as your person and making sure the actions and decision-making skills and how that matches with who you are is really important in making a decision like this, both mentally, physically, money-wise, and any kind of aspect in your life, to be honest.
And then Kareem, did you have any thoughts on that question or anything that you wanted to add?
I don't know. I feel like I pretty much accepted I'm going to be broke for the next couple of years because we're in the MD PhD program. So I've been trying not to think about it.
You are provided a stipend, I will say that, but it's not, you do get money. I'll say that for those who might not know.
Oh, a clarifying question. Can you guys explain? I know some people during the MD PhD years are those paid for by your programs. If you're in an MSTP program or if you're in an MD PhD program, do you get a stipend during that time period or do you pay tuition? Anyone can answer this. This is just a clarifying question for pre-meds. Yeah.
If you're MSTP, you don't have to pay anything. They'll give you a stipend for the entire duration of your program.
And then we have time for probably just a few more questions, and then we're gonna have to let the panelists go for tonight. Our panelists, there have been a few questions in the chat. If you feel comfortable sharing your emails, please feel free to share it in the chat with the attendees for tonight. One of the other questions that we have, looking towards the future, one of our audience members, Allison Thuram, mentioned that she heard of a typical 80-20 split for MD PhDs. What kind of research or medicine split do you personally see yourself doing in the future, and why?
I think even the one thing I will say, just being fully transparent, is even as a fifth year student, I don't know what that answer looks like. I do still think that I am enjoying the research components more than the medical components as of now. So I would love to, whether it's, I've heard about like there's medical consulting that people do for like pharma companies. I would love to do like just a little bit of clinic, and that in practice looks like I've heard ER physicians who do like one weekend like every 2 months, or like one afternoon a week. I think I hear like one afternoon or one morning a week for their clinical shifts. Like that seems to be common. Um, I'm kind of like more open to that. I don't think I'm set on being a PI, especially like I don't know how NIH funding will look for the sciences in the next few years, but um, I'm very much open into like whatever avenues are good for research in a couple of years. And briefly, I also will add though, when I interviewed, I was very firm on saying I was sticking to the 80-20 split. And I was saying that I wanted to be a PI. Whether or not that's true, at this point, I also still do not know. But I did say I wanted to be a PI when I was interviewing.
Yeah, I want to say that you are your greatest masterpiece, and it's okay if things change as you go along your journey. For me specifically, I'm interested in becoming a cardiothoracic surgeon scientist. So I spend time in the OR as well as seeing patients, and also being at the bedside doing experiments for different types of cardiovascular diseases and looking into therapeutics. I do see myself becoming a PI and hopefully a part of healthcare administration later down the road. So that's where I see myself maybe like 20 to 30, 40 years from now. Was that everything, or was there something else I had to answer there?
Um, I guess follow-up question to that. What specialties are you guys interested in? So your
Mhm.
split, your career, kind of just what you're looking at towards the
Yeah,
future.
yeah, yeah. So its specialty would be cardiothoracic surgery. So I'd go into residency for that, and then I'll become a scientist as a surgeon. So that's a breakdown for me in terms of my long-term aspirations and goals.
I'm thinking about med psych.
Hi. Well, thank you guys so much for answering all those questions. We have a few more questions in the chat, but I see that our panelists have left their emails. So unfortunately, we won't be able to get to all of those questions tonight, but I want to thank our panelists again for all the insights that you provided during this session. I know that the students definitely have a lot to now ponder and add to their considerations when applying to MD PhD programs. Looking towards the future, we do have our first journal club session at the end of this month on February 24th. So if you are on this call and you're interested in the MD PhD path, it's a perfect opportunity to practice, presenting or reviewing research articles. That again, the application has been listed on our website as well as our National SNMA Maps page. And we will be releasing the RSVP link for attendees as well. So you definitely want to get involved in that initiative. Next month, we'll be having our webinar on poster presentations for those who are presenting at AMAC or other national conferences. It's really important just to, kind of get some tips from people who have done it before and have actually won. So we'll have several panelists for that webinar who actually won at previous AMACs, both last year and I think as far back as 3 years. We usually try to aim to have 3 to 4 panelists. So that list of panelists will be released closer to the date. But you should follow us on our SNMA National SNMA Maps page on IG to stay up to date with information. And if you are a dues paying SNMA member, you should subscribe to our newsletter so that you find out about all the opportunities that we have. There are several scholarships that are currently still going out for Blueprint MCAT awards, as well as academic scholarships and our National SNMA Maps Award nominations have been put out. So definitely get those in before February 19th. I believe is the deadline. But with that, I want to thank the panelists again for taking the time to chat to our pre-med SMA MAPS members. And we can't wait to chat with you guys again and share more information next month at our DRC webinar. Have a good one, you guys. Bye.
Thank you for being such a great host, Grace.
Thank